Nancy gave and Roya has summed everything up. So the only thing left for me to say tonight is, again, thank you, but also thank you to the artists, and thank you to the moderator. The moderator is Debra Herrick, Debra Herrick, and she is co-founder and editor-in-chief at Lum Magazine. We have copies on the desk there.
Yay!
Yes, yeah, it's very impressive. I know that it's also online, and I think you'll really enjoy that. It's focusing a lot on the Santa Barbara area, which is nice for us to see a different perspective than just Los Angeles all the time. So tonight, I'd like to introduce, this is Debra, Laddie John Dill, Cynthia Innis, Charles Arnoldi, Luciana Abait, and Claudia Parducci. They're all fabulous artists. I'd like to thank them for being here this evening.
This is a wonderful turnout for a really extraordinary exhibition. So before I can say anything else, I really just want to say that I'm honored to be here. This is a beautiful exhibition. It was curated by Lynn with Roya, the director, and I just think it's beautiful. It's a really good achievement. I'm stunned by how great it is. I want to just jump right in with questions. Since we've all had a nice amount of time to really soak in the exhibition and the art, and let's hear a little insight from our artists. I want to start by talking to Luciana. The way I'm going to moderate tonight, just to give everyone a bit of a guide, is that I'm going to talk to each artist individually. And then at the end, we can, or throughout, maybe we're able to make some connections. And then at the end, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions from the audience. So I'm going to start with Luciana. Luciana's art is directly in the back. It was really, for most people who came in through that passageway, was the entree into the exhibition. Luciana, much of your work is hyperreal, photodigital collages, two-dimensional, magnificent photographs of stunning ice caps, some with a hot pink sky, some with a blue, a painted intervention. Your piece, Ivy, is a three-dimensional installation comprised of dozens of emerald butterflies. I read in an art review in Stir magazine that you do intense research for your work, even traveling to remote places to document the natural world and effects of climate change. In that same article, Luciana, you discussed your commitment to environmental and social issues in your art, noting that what you are creating is a hopeful vision in your work. Natural landscapes and human-made objects are adapted to new roles, or possibly adapted to new roles where they coexist in a magical reality. And that magical reality is Luciana's words. Speak to us about this magical reality you are creating. And also, I want to segue to you with a fantastic quote from the contemporary art publication PAC that describes your work as traduciendo lo horrible en belleza consumada. Also, please translate for our Spanish learners in the audience.
Is it working? Yes? Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lynn and Roya, for giving me this amazing opportunity to exhibit with these incredible artists, which I have admired for such a long time. So it's like a real dream come true. So thank you so much. Well, what I want to do with my work. Basically, each of my works intend to create a new world, a magical reality where viewers are transported into a magical, different reality. All the works are very, very surreal, so they are all based on photographs of real places, but then they all have this magical and surreal quality. For example, the work Ivy, I was inspired by environmental issues and also by themes of adaptation and assimilation. So I was, as I work with photography, I always want intend to take photography to a third dimensional level. That's why I created a sculptural piece with my photographs. And in this case, animals and insects are becoming the leaves of an ivy, and they are crawling onto a wall. So as much as you can see the work as this beautiful garden, this joyful garden, you can also see all these animals transforming into something else in order to survive into this new environment and then this new reality. And this not only happens to animals, but it also happens to humans. In the round pieces that you see next to ivy, you will see tiny humans swimming among plants. So humans in those cases are becoming insects. So I create these imaginary landscapes where humans don't dominate nature, but they live side by side. So yes, it's like a utopia in a way. Mm-hmm. And I approach environmental themes, even though we know that we are in a crisis, but I view our issues not through a doom and gloom lens, but I depict these themes in a very beautiful and joyful manner, because I think that's the best way to attract the public. I think when they see beautiful colors and a beautiful landscape, this visual power that the works have are very attractive, and people can get close to them. They are drawn to the works, and once they are drawn to the works, they start observing all these details, and hopefully they start wondering what's going on, and they will start thinking of the more deeper issues.
Just a follow-up. In the literary canon, and particularly in the Latin American literary canon, we have magical realism, and then we have lo fantastico, we have fantasy. And magical realism is generally described as having logical parameters where everything within it makes sense, and it really creates a hermetic universe. So as long as you're in that universe, everything is possible. And that would be Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Juan Rulfo. And then we have the fantastic. The fantastic is where the story only makes sense within itself, but it always has questions. And anyone reading it knows that it can't be true. There's no logic to it. It's really elements of supernatural or unsolved mysteries. Where do you think your art fits in that parameter?
Wow. I think I would like to write my next review. I love how you describe my work. I would say, everything that you're saying, just my work can fit into everything that you're saying. This magic realism, yes.
For me, I'm feeling almost a little sad though, because I think the only way we have a positive future with our reality of climate change is through fantasy or magical realism, because the logic of the natural world doesn't sustain a happy ending.
Yes, actually one curator was telling me some of my icebergs are imaginary icebergs. I create these icebergs from photographs that I've taken of different mountains and pieces of ice, and photographs that my friends have sent me from glaciers. So I combine my personal history to a collective memory. And if we continue on this path, icebergs will disappear in 200 years from now. Yeah. So this curator was telling me that actually the artworks depicting icebergs are going to be the only thing that's left of icebergs in 200 years, because real icebergs will no longer exist.
That is really interesting. And I've also heard people say that, it's a literary quote again, but that, no, I'm just gonna I'm gonna move on to Laddie. Thank you so much, Luciana, that was insightful. Laddie.
Yes.
Like Oprah here. Laddie. It's really a privilege to be here with you, Laddie, and to see the light sentences in person. You are well known as a California light and space artist. And these works particularly have been part of your entree into the canon. works in the Light Sentences series were first shown in the late 1960s and early 1970s, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
1971.
1971, perfect, thank you. Accuracies, always
February
better, yes.
20th.
I always choose accuracy over flourish, so thank you. The electric light pieces constructed with custom-made hand-blown glass tubes and argon gas lights, as if floating, the streaks of light housed by glass tubular segments of varied lengths in luminous jewels of color, have an ethereal, abstract nature. And yet, the organized and rational positioning of differently colored pieces, comprising sometimes 7-foot-long verticals, alludes to a system of communication like Morse code. Some of you have probably already read this, but the New York Times described, Mr. Dill called these works light sentences, lightening the segments of color to words grouped in phrases and sentences. This suggests that light itself could be a transcendental language. But the effect of these works in concert is less verbal and more like trippy visual chamber music. And I hope you like that quote, because I know sometimes people don't like the quotes from writers, but Laddie, you have said that you began this series and working with earth materials like light and space because you were looking for an alternative to easel painting. Talk to us about light sentences. What is the light saying? And how has your relationship with light and space within the arts discourse changed since the 70s when you first began to show this series?
Let me see.
This is the oral examination.
Well, I have to give you a little background. I grew up, in West Los Angeles, a little north, and a lot of influence in these works that you see here are influenced through my stepfather, who was a mathematician and a lens designer, and was ultimately responsible, one of the early guys, for night vision. And he worked, so I grew up in a house, comfortably, that had laser beams running down the hallway, splitting into 5 directions, but don't look at it, or you'll die. Don't touch this, that kind of thing. Don't touch the back of anything. This is in 1955, 56. I grew up out there in Malibu in the 50s, quite different now. Then I ended up going to Chenard Art Institute, where one of the things that was kind of implanted in my mind was alternatives. It's like things like paint just weren't doing it for me. So I just started naturally working with luminous materials, and then finally got a studio that was nice enough, big enough, I should say, to really open up and be able to, we're talking about the late 60s. I shared with Mr. Arnoldi here, and downtown LA, and I could really, open up and do things on the floor. I got really well known after a while, after the first show I did in New York, for these sand pieces, and I am publicly giving him the reason I did it in the first place, with the sand, and realized how successful it was. So I give Chuck a lot of credit for that.
Just because of my cat.
Yeah. And now you're allergic to cats. Anyway, so I started working with these tubes, And I needed a guy that was reliable. The neon world is a little on the odd side. I'm also known by the Museum of Neon in downtown Los Angeles as the guy who gave neon a bad name. Because I only work with straight lines. The reason I only work with straight lines is because you could write your Declaration of Independence in neon if you wanted to. In fact, somebody's probably already done it. But I was not interested in its communicative aspects, as a line. I was more interested in what I call contained radiance. And if you look at these pieces carefully, they're almost alive inside. And they're basically a vacuum, and with various coatings on the insides of the glass, and also different glass that I've bought that is colored, which gets more and more difficult these days. Even I'm in constant search of glass, and they changed the ruling so that you can't use leaded glass anymore, and that's when Dow was making all the glass. So it's hard. It's getting rare. Anyway, so I worked out a patterning system and had that first show in New York, and then ended up doing a piece in Minneapolis for the opening of the Walker, and then things rolled along. I've been doing this for 50 years, so I never thought I'd say that, but I don't know. I'm better at answering questions about it. I don't want to get into a lot of tech unless you want to hear it.
Well, the tech is fascinating. I like in what you're saying, how you're describing the light inside as having its own energy and its own personality or life itself. And that's true, right? Light has its own rationality and process of its own. And then it's trapped inside these tubes.
It's not trapped, it's in a vacuum.
It's in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Tell us
It's
about,
a
I think a little
strong-
tech would be
It's
interesting.
a really strong vacuum. And this gas, argon gas, let's say, I use a lot of that. It's pumped into the tube, and if I want to make it brighter, I add mercury to it, just blow it in. Don't inhale. What was the question?
What was the question? Let me go back. The question was,
Oh,
we've
tech.
just, we were talking about tech.
Okay, so it's a very strong vacuum in there. Therefore, technically, it can be on forever. Usually about 75 to 100 years is realistic. But then you just put a new electrode on it. Transformers used to be these big, hulky, vibrating monsters. Now they're like 3 by 5 inches. Everything's miniaturized. So, but what keeps me going with these things is just these incredible possibilities that will outlive me for sure. And I just keep wanting to go deeper and deeper into these color phenomena that occur from this river of violet light that comes through and illuminates.
Yeah. No, it is interesting. It's also interesting that you mentioned that they're not supposed to be communicative, that you weren't interested in this like idea of a system or a language,
that's
not.
Or talking about architecture and its bone straight line.
Is it more like sentences, like determined, like a sentence, like
No, the sentences came from the fact that I had to color code everything.
Oh.
So I write these out, and then finally I'd see this line of color-coded words.
Yeah.
That's how that happened.
I see. How do you feel about the transcendental reference? Do you feel like you are bringing an effect or kind of something coming from somewhere else that would go beyond our rationality as people who want to define things like I'm trying to do right now.
No, there's nothing to look at except that line.
Yeah.
There's no transcendental.
No. It's
It's a
just,
tube
it's it's a
With
tube.
gas running through it,
Yeah.
illuminating the inside.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
I'm done. My job is done. Thank you so much. Thank you. I love that you two are you friends? Charles and Laddie?
Best friends.
Best friends? Really? Is that true? Can you confirm?
Long time.
Can you confirm that?
Okay, so I'm up next?
You're up next.
Oh, God, okay.
All right. I think we're getting a little.
What is that? Who's that?
I don't know.
Not me, right?
You're the only scientist, I think, up here right now, Laddie. Oh, okay. Okay. All right, let's go.
Let's go.
Charles. Or do you prefer Chuck?
Either one, I don't.
Okay. Let's get down to business, I think I'm hearing here. Again, what a privilege to be here with you. If there is anyone here who is not already aware, Charles Arnoldi is a groundbreaking California artist. Originally from Ohio, I read. He moved to the West Coast as a young adult and rewrote the vision of natural elements, particularly sticks, in the modern sculpture and painting canon. I want to begin by referencing an essay by Dave Hickey, which begins with a beautiful epigraph from songwriter Jon Stewart. It's something how the life will fall as to how the heart is tossed. Hickey quite brilliantly lays out the concept of the natural. Arnoldi being a natural, as in a naturally talented artist who maybe wasn't satisfied with things coming easy to him. So he began to incorporate sticks and later other iterations of armature into his work, sometimes creating three-dimensional pieces that bulged. I'm sorry, I lost my place. That bulged from their brackets. No, let's keep going. That bulged from their brackets to the wall, and other times monochromatic or vibrantly colored geometric abstractions on canvas that beckon the viewer to come closer, to immerse themselves in the structure that he has created. So Arnoldi created a universe that was hard, abstract, and complex. Now I'm going to quote Hickey. The defining attribute of this process and of the stick paintings themselves is, writes Hickey, specifically the idea of the armature, skeleton of the imagination, the archaeological linchpin of physical thought. With an armature, one is free to move on, move back, elaborate, or refine. Amidst all the permutations of sculpture, painting, drawing, and assemblage that Arnoldi has created over the years, the armature is the single constant. The grouping of parts, the assembly of separate entities made by new pattern, angle, division, balance, and interaction. And it's a kid's idea, of course, a kind of recurring utopia that can be achieved again and again, but only by a natural. It's beautiful. Those are Hickey's words, though. Here are mine, a little chunkier. Charles, there are two naturals here. You, the natural artist, who pushes against the difficult and challenging to find an original idea. And then there's the natural world, which is also in a tense relationship with you, the artist, who has created this armature, which it also fights to break free or to be contained. I'm not sure. Charles, speak to us about how you approach the natural world in your art and how you conceive the function of the armature that you have created and reiterated throughout this incredible cosmovision and universe.
Okay, first off, Dave was a great guy. He died about a year ago. Unfortunately, a lot of our friends, Laddie and I, are getting old. We're losing people constantly. But I don't think about my work the way critics, talk about it. It's kind of interesting. And I'm here actually by accident. I'm lucky. I make stuff, okay? And I couldn't be a doctor or a lawyer or anything if my life depended on it, but I have an imagination, I have this ability to make things. And as Laddie was saying, I ended up at Chouinard quite by accident in the late 60s also. And I was a naive, dumb boy from Ohio, and I thought art was paintings and sculpture. And I get to Chouinard and they said, painting and sculpture is dead. It's all been done. And so they were pushing us to experiment in different directions. And for me, I didn't quite understand that. And so what I thought my job as a young artist was to try to come up with something that nobody had ever done before. And so I tried to make paintings without making actual paintings. And I made these plexiglass paintings because he and I started a plexiglass frame shop, Acme Frame Company. I made these big plexiglass paintings, and in 1969, I won the Young Talent Award from the County Museum because Laddie and I were hustling frames at opens. We met these people, and they came downstairs and gave me this award. And I got called into the office because you're not eligible to get that award. You're a student, you know. And they said, we understand that you and Laddie started the Acme Frame Company. You've hired artists from school to work for you, yeah. And you spent your student loans to buy the saws and stuff from the school to start your company. I said, yeah. So they said, you can't do this, so I quit. And fortunately, I have this ability to make stuff. And one of the things that happened to me was Jim Ganser, who was a fellow student of ours who grew up in Malibu. There was a fire in Malibu, and he said there's a great orchard right next to the highway. And when people can see that orchard, they're going to go and steal oranges and avocados, and we should get up there before them and steal all the fruit. And so I was always trying to figure out, you know, ways to make stuff that, you know, people hadn't done. So I'm stealing fruit, and I noticed that all the trees around had been burned, and the branches were burnt into charcoal. And so they looked like hand-drawn lines that I didn't have to make the line. So I thought, that's interesting. I'll appropriate these lines from nature, take them back to the studio, and make stuff out of them. So I made some stick paintings. And the thing is that all I'm trying to do is make valid art. And by that I mean, I'm making inanimate objects that it's an idea here. Once I transform this thing to a real thing, it becomes a dialogue between me and the thing I'm making. And I'm hoping that that thing will speak to me, you know, that is giving me energy back. And when I think that thing has energy, I let it go out into the world, hoping that if that piece of art can go anywhere in the world and people can relate to it without knowing who I am or who it's represented by or think it's worth money, then I think maybe I'm doing the right thing. And so, because I think that 99.9% of all stuff created as art doesn't hold up. And I'm not sure, I think a real artist has to have as much doubt as confidence. And so I'm constantly struggling trying to do things. And the problem is when you make something, you get a dialogue going, and you could do this, you could do that, which you realize immediately, I could have tried that, so there's infinite possibilities. And one thing leads to another. And I'm constantly pursuing those infinite possibilities. And I try to get inspired by things other than just my imagination. Like this painting is inspired by Machu Picchu. I could go into that, but it's long. I tend to get long-winded. I'm going to try to keep this real simple. But what is kind of fascinating to me, when I was a young artist, I tried to do something nobody had ever done before. So I made chainsaw paintings and stick paintings. And what I realized after a while is that's not my job at all. My job is just to follow my imagination and try to, you know, do these things. And hopefully people can relate to them. And so in the old days, if somebody came to my student and said, oh, that reminds me of Bryce Martin, who I think I did his scribbly things before he did it. Fuck, I get mad. But now, somebody comes to my student and says, oh, that looks like Dubuffet or anybody. Now I consider it a compliment because I think all, as a species, some of us are lucky enough to be able to make stuff. We couldn't be doctors, we couldn't be bankers. And so through history, for instance, in Machu Picchu, when Kate and I went there for our 35th wedding anniversary, I was very inspired by the shapes of the rocks. And the thing is, the shapes of the rocks aren't 90 degrees angles. It's not logic, it was heartfelt. And I realized whoever did that was an artist in a sense. He felt this thing to do that. Now, how they did it and why, nobody knows. But I felt a kinship to him, or him or her or whoever it was. And the thing was, like, I'm always trying to make paintings. I love painting, and I make sculpture too, reluctantly, because it takes up so much space. But when you make a painting, you start out with a flat surface and a stick with the hair on the end, and you make a painting, and you make shapes. I don't care if it's portraiture or landscape or whatever. And when I saw those shapes, I thought, that's a good idea. Get a piece of charcoal, draw a shape, interlock another one. Don't make an Arnoldi, just make a composition and turn it into an oil painting. But for me, things go through generation after generation. And like this piece is related to the Machu Picchu, and the Hawaiian painting there is related to the orbs. I could go into all this, but I could talk for hours, so that's enough.
Thank you. Well, a couple things. First of all, I don't think that great art has an aura. I don't think that there is like something magical about great art. But I do think that some pieces, some works that some artists make are stunning, and it's just undeniable. I mean, who could look at this painting and not stop? It's a showstopper. It's fantastic. So there is something, like you're saying, that some people can do.
It's like I tell people frequently, Jasper Johns is incapable of making a bad painting. He can't help himself. I don't like his new paintings as much as his old paintings, but Jasper has ideas, he has talent, he has taste, and he has a sensitivity about the way he makes paints and the way he applies it. It's like Van Gogh. If you see a Van Gogh, you walk around, you look at it, it's just brush strokes, but they came from this place that is very rare, and so they have energy, and they can live on for a couple hundred years, and really be appreciated. And I think that art does have a terrible value because it enhances your life, it inspires. It's not shouting, but it makes you think about other things. It's not just survival. You can escape a little bit from yourself and think. So I think art's valuable in a funny way. And all we try to do is make objects that make that happen,
Right. No, and I appreciate the way you've also talked a bit about the experience, the profession of being an artist. It sounds similar to, the novelist who has the first great book, but then the second one's a flop because they are thinking too much about making an Arnoldi. How do you continue the legacy once you build it, but still stay authentic without just commercial, like repeating yourself and becoming like too commercial.
Creativity has a very high mortality rate. It's everybody, when you're young and enthusiastic, you want success. You want people to appreciate you. You hopefully make some money and stuff. And so when people do things that are successful early on, they tend to repeat themselves. It happens with rock bands and actors and everything. And what happens is 10 or 15 years down the road, they realize, I put myself in this cul-de-sac, but they can't get back to that place where they really had great intentions. And it's really sad because so many people do that. They get stuck trying to be successful. And I think one of the things you have to do is take risks,
It's interesting because we think about some of our greatest writers, like Jorge Luis Borges, or our greatest artists, and we can include you here. And part of what you're doing is creating a universe. Within this universe of your work, your body of work, we have repeating themes, we have a conversation, we have a logic. So it is also a statement of a great artist to do things again and again.
Well, I don't know, great artists, that's a weird statement. And I think great
Maybe you
artists.
should define great artist.
Yeah, I don't know, you're right. Maybe it was a poor choice of
Never
words.
mind.
But
Let's move on. We can come back to all this. Put these girls on.
all right, we're gonna move on. Thank you so much, Charles. Another round of applause. Claudia's work. Claudia Parducci.
I have to follow Chuck.
Somebody does. I tried.
Oh, okay.
I tried to segue. Claudia's work is this magnificent installation piece that's in the room adjacent. Her piece has the unique quality that you can walk within it, which I hope that was okay that I did that. It's always a pleasure for me when I can touch art or walk inside of it. I like to touch the art. I didn't touch yours though. I did walk through it. Oh, okay. Next time. Can I? Okay, everyone is in my life. Claudia's work comes, she has said, from an interest in histories of destruction and reconstruction. She's moved, or you've moved, from focusing on the impact of human conflict and natural disasters to the nature of the cycle itself. And I'm going to quote you here: the idea that we are always somewhere in the process of building and tearing down, exploring survival strategies, including the labor and fantasy that go into reimagining a future after destruction. The piece that we have next door, or in this gallery, but next gallery, is made out of fiber, and it's in the fiber arts tradition, which it's a woven piece, which we also think of as women's work. But I also want to think about it within the context of Martin Heidegger's ideas about building, constructing, and dwelling. To build a world is to create the world in which we live, and that has been dominated by the male perspective, historically, socially. And so I find it fascinating that you have constructed a world, that is part of the labor you do as an artist, is that you integrate the fiber arts and you integrate a female perspective, and you take that job, that role of constructing in building the world in which we will inhabit when we are interacting with your art. But I also notice, and this is particular to fiber arts and the way we weave, which is one long thread. I'm sure we all know what weaving is, but if anyone has crocheted or knitted or sewn, you just really understand like the labor intensity, the time it takes to do it, and how it all is connected, and yet you can also just pull one thread and take it all apart. So the entire piece is linked in this thread, but she's also siloed it and created separate towers. So we have something that is both connected, linked, but also separate with enclosures. And the way we can have air flow through it, it makes me think that this world you've built, it would survive an earthquake or a flood, and that this is a place where we can dwell. Your work has been described as a female utopia, and the labor-intensive methods, such as hand knitting and dyeing, they really highlight the time, the labor and craft. And it's been said that it hints at the possibility of a society designed by women. I'm always fascinated by cultures that have a matriarch, and I was wondering if this is true, if you consider your work in this frame.
Not all my work. This particular project, I actually did think about that. I thought about, it didn't come out of any grand ideas. I was learning how to knit, and I asked my assistant, who it turned out I found out she knew how to knit, and I said, well, what can I do with knitting? Can you make a circle? Can you make a collar? How long can you make it? And I was very excited by that, and our world was in tumult at the time, and I wanted a project that, I didn't want to be angry for years with the politics of our nation, and I was just looking for a project that would keep me busy for a good long time, and that I could just kind of stick my head in the ground, and I thought, I'm gonna make these tall pieces, and I'm gonna make so many of them that it'll take me years And I knew they would look structural, and so I tried to come up with, what structure has lots and lots and lots of columns. And I went back to the Parthenon, which is what you think about naturally, which, let me digress. You quoted Dave Hickey. My favorite quote of Dave Hickey's, which was something I heard him say in a lecture, is that art either comes from music or from poetry. And he was speaking about how some art is just all about feeling, the way music is that universal feeling language. And some art is kind of processed through words. And to my great chagrin, I come from the poetry end of things. So I tend to think a lot before, during, and after I make my work. And so I couldn't just start making these columns and like see where they went. I had to like figure out how many and why and how that made sense. And so it got me thinking about the ruins of this like the beginnings of Western civilization and what these columns mean, and the fact that it's just become part of the landscape of our world. These broken civilizations, and that got me thinking about, what if women had designed that building? Like, how would that have been different? And I did think about, it's possible that it would have been more flexible and less rigid, and that, and so I was interested in making something that held the contradiction of being strong and soft at the same time. Being, the tensile strength of rope, which is what jute is, the textile I used. It's really, 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 really strong, and yet it's soft and flexible.
When we look at it, it has a very organic nature to it. It reminds me, I don't know the name of the bird, but there's a bird who has a really long nest, and it's often used in kind of applied arts, like for a light or a basket. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
It's really popular in Mexico. Or, does someone know?
The weaver bird.
A weaver bird.
How appropriate.
Yeah, and it doesn't exactly look like a beehive, but it's interesting to think about the connection when we think of there. We have the queen bee, and the world she creates is also very laborious and extremely both easy to break, but also extremely resistant, and has in fact stood the test of time as a structure.
And I tend to, with my work, I do a lot of thinking, and then I stop thinking, and then I get into process. And this was a years-long project that I just knitted night and day for a few years, and I wasn't thinking about women's labor while I did it. I was doing it, But at the same time, I understood that regardless of what I was thinking about when I started the project, that's not the art, and that's not what the viewer sees as a forest, perhaps. Or I had someone who said it reminded them of being underwater and seeing things moving around, because they kind of move when you pass them, and that's what I think art should do. That
yeah, or
people have their own relationship to it.
Or if anyone's seen when it's kind of horrible that they do this, but it's very fascinating when they put cement inside of ant tunnels, and then you can see the entire the complex of an ant's life underground has this extremely beautiful and organic architecture to it, like what you have built also.
Hadn't thought of that.
Let's turn now to Cynthia before we start with Cynthia. To Cynthia before we start with our questions. So, Cynthia Ona Innis, your works are the beautiful prints, or the canvases?
There's works on paper.
Works on paper.
And paintings.
they're in the, just to make sure everyone knows the work we're talking about, it's in the gallery, like, boop, and they're beautiful. They're delicate, but also technically exquisite. Cynthia is a painter and a sculptor. Her works have fluid transformations that she draws from nature itself, from things she sees or experiences. Some of her work alludes to the challenges of the idea of an eternal landscape, and I think this is really brilliant and interesting, and I'm going to talk about why in a second. She's combined multiple viewpoints also in her work. So when we look at one of her pieces, we're looking at it from various perspectives. Again, I don't know if you're trying to do this, but just connecting here, that's also a more feminist, culturally way of approaching things, is to look at things from several different sides. Her process involves painting, dyeing, and bleaching various fabrics and textiles, crafting tapestries, and we can describe it as blurring the boundaries of abstraction and realism. Cynthia, your work is so evocative in person. It's truly like a poem, I think. Now I have to skip 2 pages. Two of your works reference the post pile that Lynn explained to me is near Mammoth. So we have the Devil's post pile, and then we have a post pile. And I'm going to ask you to talk more about this, but when we look at those pieces, we see a naturally occurring monument. And then the monument, this structure, subtly throughout, we see its devolution of structure to evanescence. And what I mean by that is we have they almost look like mountains or a castle or even an industrial complex. And I don't know what it's from, but you're going to explain that to us. And then Lynn explained to me that it comes from a volcano, but I'm interested in hearing you talk about it. And then it's almost like their guts, like all of their innards just start to spill out, and we see them spewing, and the spews are colorful, and sometimes there's lines, and sometimes they're blurred shapes or bulges, and then these forms dissolve into brushstrokes, watermarks, impressions, traces, and the boundary between the figurative and abstraction, the picture and emptiness, well, it's frail, no? And it's intermittent in her works. And it makes me ask myself, what is at stake when that boundary is so frail? What happens when we take away that boundary and we do we open the floodgates and we let something that has structure dissolve? Indeed, you've said that your work, there's a word I'm missing here, but your work reflects the movement of the tectonic plates of the San Andreas Fault, the push and pull of kinetic energy, and monumental landforms. What a powerful way of presenting the forces which tenuously hold us and the natural world together. I said that. No, those were my words. Inspired by yours. But I would like to pull back from my poetization of your work and ask you to talk to us about where that effect that I'm describing literally comes from.
The fragile boundary.
The post pile.
The post pile. So physically, the post pile.
Yeah, I'm like we could start with the post pile, and then if you could take it from there into how you interpret it in the way you do.
Devil's Post Pile, if anybody's been there, is out near Mammoth Lakes. We used to go to Mammoth as kids and traveled every winter to go skiing, and it always held this, maybe because of the name Devils, it was daunting, and possibly the wrong place to go to, but our aunt would take us there, and you have to go look at it, and you have to go see it, and you'd have to go back in the summer to see it. You can only get there really in the summer unless you can hike in 10 miles in the snow on your own. So in the summer, it's this amazing geological wonder. It's the 60-foot columns of basalt that are collapsing, and they've changed in my lifetime from when I was a kid. So that's something that's important for me to make art about, is to go back and visit it and see how it's changed and revisit the Devil's Postpile, which still has that lure of the devil. It was created from a volcano a long time ago that spilled out and then hit a glacier. So that's the wall that you see of basalt. And the glacier melted away, so there's this 60-foot tower of basalt. And they're crumbling, and they're beautiful, and they reflect light. So they're silver at different times of day, or whatever light is hitting them. And they're amazing. So I like that kind of thing, and finding those kind of things now, probably from these road trips and trips we did as kids, going back to revisit places that are here and maybe not that familiar to people.
What are you hoping that the viewer comes away with when they look at one of your works, like Postpile?
Well, maybe go outside. I want to be outside all the time. That's where I want to be. So I've been able to make art about being outside. So maybe inspire people to go be in nature. I liked what was said, Kim said earlier about maybe if you're outside, you'll care a little bit more about it. I thought that was really powerful, and that's a hope.
Yeah.
Maybe
Exhibitions like this have kind of an internal call to action in them. Pay attention to the landscape. Think about it. Here are, 7 different points of view, all urging the world to consider the multifacetedness of life and that it's not permanent. When you're considering I guess the first question would be do you consider environmental issues as part of your arts practice? And I ask this because it's kind of like the question of, are you a feminist? Where some people don't want to associate it with it, the name, the label. They want to be judged, they want their work to be judged for what it is. But I think it's really problematic also. So I'm just curious, since we have a couple minutes, what is your feeling?
I am a feminist, and I have the multiple perspectives because I'm a woman. I mean, we all are. So,
we all are.
the multiple perspectives is, we have to have that as women. We have the gaze of everything, right? So, I do care about the environment. I think that that's a layer of the work. I don't think I'm just portraying, rainbows and clouds and saying everything's fine. I think that when you look at my work, there's everything isn't fine layer to it. And I think working with fabric, again, is a voice that's, I'm starting to get feedback. Maybe it's my. So, yeah.
I think it would be hard to look at your work and not sense how much the natural landscape changes, at the very least. And a more thoughtful approach, I think, really shows the passage of time and the way that we as humans are really only a small portion of what's happening here. Would you be surprised if there was a connection between, would you be surprised by a critic connecting your work to Japanese silk screens or some of those very simple compositions that also very delicately treated the landscape?
I would not be surprised. My dad was an architect, my mom was a flower arranger, and she did ikebana, and there was a lot of sort of philosophy in our house about design and minimalism, and so that I would not be surprised.
I am so delighted to hear that. I feel like your works, each one is like a haiku. It is composed of very few, very simple elements, and yet it tells a very powerful story.
Very nice.
Lynn and Roya, is it time for Q&A?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Perfectly timed, 7:58. Do we have our first question? Should I pass the microphone?
I can do that first. Woo! Here, let's do it this way, because otherwise no one can hear you.
This is a great room to have what we just had in here. Mr. Arnoldi, I've been looking at your work for quite a long time while we're sitting in here, and I appreciate the formal attributes that you've used, the color line, leading the eye around, all the things that really nobody's ever talked about. We don't need a paragraph on your work. We don't need even to know that that's Machu Picchu. Your work connects to the past with Albers, Frank Stella. You actually look like Frank Stella from this distance. And also,
He's not as good a look as I am, and he's
anyway, I really appreciate the way you lead my eye around with the different colors. And also you connect to the computer in a way that I see it, because when you make forms on the computer and then you decide, yours is much more labor intensive not using the computer, but you can change background like Albers did all those studies, and you can have a red form and your blue over there on the green and on the yellow. You mentioned the word infinite possibilities, and you're right. Every one of your paintings has infinite possibilities. You could put them online and you could play with all the color relationships. So you're connected to the history. We don't even need to talk about it. It's line, color, form, all the vocabulary of art. And you are doing stuff with styrofoam, which is a certain thing. I used to save styrofoam myself. So what's next for you? Are you going to keep working in this vein? That's my question. It's magnificent. The rhythm, the color, the form, all that harks back to art history and then taking it to new places. So, it's amazing. And you are connected to the future because all could be put on a computer and you could play around with all those colors if you ever wanted to do that.
Well,
It's
first,
infinite.
Just let me tell you, I don't know how to turn a computer on.
Oh my,
I can
okay.
barely use my iPhone or whatever you call it, okay? But I work basically 7 days a week. I just make stuff, and I just can't help it. I just, it's like, I love paintings, for instance. And if I walk through a museum and I see a painting, it can be by anybody. I'll walk over and look at it because I want to get right there where the artist was, and I want to feel it. And so I just make stuff all the time. But what's also interesting, I was hearing everybody talk, art is also, the world is in such a weird place right now. Art to me is also an escape. Because like I drive to work every day, to and from, is 20 miles, and I listen to the news radio. By the time I get to the studio, I'm so anxious and frustrated. But I start working, and I get to escape that. I get to get involved in my art. And then I go home again, and I listen to it on the way home. But it's just it's a world that I feel comfortable in, and it's so open-ended.
Right.
I tell you, in fact, my wife keeps complaining I work too much. I work on several things at once, and I just make stuff. I can't help it. Anyway, I'm working on lots of projects, a whole bunch of things. I work on two or three different styles of paintings at the same time, because I just don't have enough time to keep up with my ideas.
Well, congratulations. This is a beautiful show, everybody. So.
All right.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Can you raise a hand and I'll bring the mic to you?
That's it.
Wow.
Was an exhaustion.
Well, it was.
Oh, the
Sorry,
original,
you-
I noticed that too. The original when I said to Sylvia, let me find that, to Luciana.
Oh.
Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, the sentence was that her work was described as traduciendo lo horrible en belleza consumada.
Can you translate it?
Yeah, so I translate the horrible things into some beauty.
A beautiful thing that can be consumed, like digested. No, consumada or no.
There's beauty in there. That I got.
Consumada is something that really happens. So,
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, transforming horrible things into something, into a beauty that's happening. Something
Yeah.
like that.
Okay, we have one more question?
Okay, so just quickly, I'm curious about the preparation that goes into your works, because it sounds like some of you are more spontaneous and others might have a lot of planning involved. So anybody that wants to comment.
Thanks, Nancy.
Really? I have to pick someone?
Huh? Go that way.
We know where you're going.
I don't know about all these guys, but for instance, I order stretcher bars, and I usually order 10 or 20 at a time, because I have ideas I want to make paintings, so I just order stuff. And I order paint constantly, just bring the paint, bring the stuff. And when I got into the foam, it was quite by accident. I found out about this foam company that makes these box of foam. They're 52 by 52 inches by 12 feet long. And they make this foam for people to make sculpture out of. And they make this certain plaster that's supposed to be fireproof and weatherproof, and especially made for the foam. So I got in, I ordered a block of this foam cut in 8-inch sections like a loaf of bread. So I just made stuff. And the minute I did, I thought, God, I better get some more. So I ordered more foam and more foam and more foam, you know, until I kind of get sick of myself. Or if I get too good at something, I stop making it, you know. I just feel like I want to make this stuff because I make it. And I hate to do commissions because I feel like I'm working for somebody. And I recently agreed to do a commission because there was a young critic who brought a collector over, and he desperately needs money, so I agreed to do a commission. And I said, but here's what I'm going to do. And I think they were 54 inches by 108 inches long, these horizontal paints. I said, I'll paint 6 of them, and the guy can pick one out, and I'll get stuck with the rest. Because that way I feel like I'm doing it for myself. And if he takes one, great, you know. Anyway, I don't really plan and think things out. I just get an idea, and I just get the materials and do it.
So you're more spontaneous than what about,
I think the process starts by finding a place I want to go to, like Iceland, and that's part of the process, is to go and be in that environment. And what I can't capture in a camera, that inspires me. If I take a picture and it's not there, I look at the camera and it's not there, I can't get that. That's exciting to me, and then I want to take that back to the studio and work with what can't I get on the camera? What can I work with that can't be, you know, photographed? So that's really where my process starts. And finding locations like Yellowstone, Mammoth, places that are interesting, that have maybe are overlooked, but have exciting natural histories and natural phenomena.
Susan, did you have a question?
Well, I wanted to first comment, Charles, I think it's very interesting that you say I make stuff. I've never heard an accomplished artist describe himself as just making stuff. I find that very intriguing.
Well, I'll tell you this. I've been fortunate enough to know Frank Stella, Jasper Johns, Andy Warhol, Robert Rauschenberg, you know, Donald Judd, you know, John Chamberlain. All these are pretty decent artists, and I've never gone to one of their studios yet that they said, isn't that great? It's always, oh, this is something I'm working on. You know what I mean? It's not about the perfect object or anything. It's just this thing you're trying to do, and you're not even quite sure where you're going or how it's going to turn out. But artists, I think true artists just work. It's the carrot in front of the donkey. You never get there, but you're pursuing this thing. And so I would feel like an idiot to say, oh, I'm making art. It's like, it's like when I go out, if I'm in the studio, I have paint splatter all over my clothes, and I go out to lunch, I change my clothes. I don't want to walk outside with paint going, hey, look at me, I'm an artist. I just feel lucky that I can do what I do, and I'm hoping I'm doing a good job. And I'll never know for sure, but I'm trying. And I make stuff.
As a follow-up to that, I wanted to ask both you and then Laddie, in the vein of saying I make stuff, what do you think of, or how do you absorb then people having these eloquent critiques of your work and going into this deep depth about there's a Morse code in what I'm doing. There's Morse code on the walls, or in your work. I mean, some eloquent things have been said, but if you're just making stuff, does that resonate with you?
Frank Stella once said, I think it was published, what you see is what you get.
That's not, though, necessarily what the critics say about your work.
What critics?
Well,
You can't think about critics if you're going to make art.
Yeah.
right.
Well, that's what I said about Dave Hickey. He was a great guy. And when he would talk about the art, or many other critics, that's not the way I'm thinking about it. And it is kind of fascinating. For instance, I'm giving my archives to the Smithsonian. This guy keeps coming to the studio. And he walks around my studio, and he starts talking to me about my art. And I get a grin on my face, and he said, I would love to write about your art. And when he talks about it, it's the kind of words and feelings. I mean, I believe in the art, but I can't put that kind of, talk to it. I mean, I just don't. And it's funny. I mean, I have a couple of kids, a wife, and everything. I really care about the world and the politics and all that stuff. But I'm not thinking about current events, because current events change every day, all day long. So I don't make current event statements, but I'm concerned about the world, about all this stuff. But that's not what's motivating me. But it's frequently interpreted that way through someone else, and that's what I was saying before. You just hope you make this stuff that goes out in the world and it affects people to be able to relate to it. I think all we want is for people to relate to the stuff we make, because I do think that art, it really gives you something back. I mean, I have a lot of art in my house, and it's sort of funny. Like, I have a Picasso in my bathroom. It's only a print. I should have bought a painting, but I didn't. I'd love to look at that Picasso, but it's just, I get something out of it. I don't know what it is, but it makes me feel good. And a lot of the art I have in the house, I'll look at it one day and I have an early Laddie John painting over my bed. And I think he was out there recently, said, you got that painting over your bed? It's been there for, I think, 30 freaking years. But, you get something out of it. Art gives you some weird energy, psychological energy, and that's what we all hope to produce, My wife's telling me to shut up. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take one of the flowers. Thank you, Laddie, for introducing Cmato to Claudia and to Chuck and the other artists for attending. It's been a great event and a pleasure. The pleasure's all ours. Thank you. Thank you.